Are visions of sugar plums dancing in your head yet? We are in the middle of the Advent season, that period of waiting expectantly for Christmas, for knowing that God is going to do something amazing. He's going to show up on earth in the form of a baby so that he can experience everything that we experience, so that he can show us what it means to live a God-centered life, and so that he can die to set the world on fire and to show us what the upside down kingdom looks like and to give us forgiveness and redemption through him. That's an exciting period of the year. And for a lot of us, it's our favorite time of the year, that waiting expectantly. But sometimes there's other sides to Advent because not only are we hoping for what's to come, sometimes during the Christmas season, we're reminded of what we've lost. And so today we have a great interview with Stephanie Duncan Smith to look at both those sides of Christmas, how we can be excited, but we can also be sad. But in both of those things, we can put ourselves under God and we can know that he is there for us. And we're also going to hear from a woman who I think encapsulates a lot of what Christmas means to me. Because just as Jesus came in the Incarnation to become like one of us, so we can be Jesus' hands and feet to those who need him. And that's a great interview too. So thank you for joining us on the Bare Marriage Podcast. I'm Sheila Ray Gregoire from baremarriage.com, where we like to talk about healthy, evidence-based biblical advice for your sex life and your marriage. And today we're going to talk about Christmas and how we can live out that expectation in our own lives. So here is our first interview. All right. Well, I am so pleased to bring on someone who's made a huge difference in my life. So Stephanie Duncan Smith, who's the author of Even After Everything. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, so glad to be here.
Yeah, so just for all of our listeners, Stephanie was our amazing editor who came in right at the end of Great Sex Rescue, helped us through She Deserves Better, and acquired and asked me to write the marriage book and some other books that are coming. So Stephanie guided that process, and yeah, she's why She Deserves Better was not something we got sued over. So thank you.
I'll never get over how much I love that title too.
Yeah, it took us a while to land on it, but it was
It's
great.
perfect.
Yeah. And now you are senior editor at Harper One,
That's right.
which we miss you, but we are glad that you are doing something awesome. And you're also writing, which is a big passion of yours after being an editor for how many years?
15 counting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a lovely book. And there's two aspects of it that I want to talk about. One is just the whole idea of the liturgical calendar and how that can help us see our lives, think about our lives more clearly. And one is just getting used to the how joy and loss often just go together, and it's hard and it's messy. And so why don't at the beginning of your book, you briefly told your story, which I think was really helpful so people knew where you were coming from. Can you tell us that briefly again?
Yeah, sure. This book in part began in a painful place, as many do. And for me, it was Advent when my husband and I had been together for a decade, and we were childless by choice. We loved our lives, just the two of us, and it took quite a discernment process for us to even begin considering, do we want to expand our family? We finally decided that we did. And just, very, very vulnerably, we we got pregnant right away. And it was
Mhm.
just a big surprise how quickly it happened after never having gone about this process before. So Advent that year for me became the time when I really warmed to the wonder of this pregnancy after really not being sure if this was what I wanted. And it came a little sooner than I probably wanted. And then the week before Christmas, we sadly lost that pregnancy.
Mhm.
And the timing felt like the ultimate betrayal at the time. I felt like, wait a second, I was just seeing the beauty of this and the gift of this and the life of this. And then it was gone. And not only that, but it felt taken from me. It felt taken from me in the time that the world was readying to celebrate the most epic pregnancy and birth narrative.
Mhm.
And that the dissonance felt too great. So I wrote this book in part out of that dissonance, just trying to understand how do you reconcile the the spectrum of life? How do you
Mhm.
reconcile joy and sorrow when they collide and it all feels too much? And then also just to continue the story, fast forward a year later, my daughter is born almost a year to the day of our loss. So December for me always holds both joy and sorrow. And I write in the book how it holds two daughters, one that we'll never get to hold and one that we did. And how do you make sense of that? And I think everyone has those experiences of how do I hold joy in one hand and sorrow in the other, and do that in a way that doesn't deny or dismiss either of those authentic experiences.
Hmm. Hmm. And then you went on to have another miscarriage, and then you had your son. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And so both of my kids, I have two kids, they're 3 and 1 right now, and both of them were born after losses. And every single time we had to make the
Hmm.
decision, are we going to take this risk again,
Hmm.
or are we just going to play it safe? And that for me became the true heartbeat of this book and what I had to reckon with and work out for myself. It's that anytime you love, you are also consenting to risk.
Hmm.
But I really do believe that everything that matters most in life can only be accessed on the other side of that risk. Because everything we want in life, we want human connection, we want love, we want a shared story. So I think back to when my husband and I made the decision to start trying again after our first loss. And I thought, this isn't going to get easier. This is a personal decision, but this was mine. For me, I thought this isn't going to get any easier with time. It's still going to be just as hard 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, as if we start today. So for us, we just decided, okay, we're going to try because we know that this is what we want. And you never know where the story's going to end. But if you choose to play it safe, that story will never even get a chance to begin. And yeah, I think those are the human questions that, and it helps to know that no love is ever wasted, but it's so hard to wait in that place of risk, whether it's, hoping for um a safe birth, or a, relationship to mend, or the kids to come home safe, or whatever it
Hmm.
is. It's we all those are human themes.
Yeah, they really are. Christmas is around the corner, but so is year end, and that means your last chance to get a tax deductible receipt for your donations to use on your 2024 tax forms. And so I'm just parachuting in here to say, if you love what we do at Bare Marriage, did you know that you can support us through the Good Fruit Faith Initiative of the Bosco Foundation? They support what we do, and in 2025, we have some amazing plans on creating materials to get people who maybe don't realize they're in the middle of toxicity yet to see that this stuff isn't healthy. We have some plans to translate things into Spanish, to get more academic papers written, and more. We want to expand because right now we're doing a great job talking to people who know that they need help, but we want to get people who don't know it yet. And so if you have some money that you would like to give to a great cause, would you consider the Good Fruit Faith Initiative? The link is in the podcast notes. And if you're outside of the United States and you can't use that tax receipt, you can also give to our Patreon. If you want to support us on a monthly basis through patreon.com/baremarriage, you get access to our exclusive Facebook group. You get unfiltered podcasts and more. And so you get some perks for supporting us. And so the link to both our Patreon and the Good Fruit Faith Initiative is in the podcast notes. I was smiling when I read your book, because I mean we've known each other for years, but I didn't know all of this about you and just how much our stories overlap because we both have had 4 pregnancies and we have 2 children, and
Mhm.
both of our children were born after loss. So Rebecca was born after a miscarriage, almost a year to the
Mm,
day of the miscarriage, and
yeah.
then Katie was born almost a year after we lost our son
Wow.
Christopher. And I was so glad Christopher was born the beginning of August and Katie was born the end of July. And I was glad that they weren't
Mm,
in the same month. That
yeah.
that meant a
Yeah.
lot to me.
Yes.
But
Those
it,
anniversaries can be so,
mhm.
so packed with so much.
Yeah. Yeah, it really can be. So, let's talk about the liturgical calendar because I don't know how many of our listeners understand it. I think this is a fairly new thing that evangelicals are starting to get into, but mainline churches have followed the liturgical calendar for ever. And as I've been getting into more of a liturgical church, which I really enjoy, I've been embracing it too. But tell us what the liturgical calendar means.
Sure. Yeah. And I would start by saying too, this can be a daunting topic for those who are unfamiliar to it. The easiest way that I would present it to you is that the liturgical year, the Christian year, the sacred year, whatever you want to call it, it's it's the pattern of the life of Christ in our time. So it at its simplest level, it follows the pattern of life, death to resurrection.
Mhm.
And that's where I think anybody and all of us can relate to that because those are human rhythms. They're not, we experience these in our lives. Whether or not you practice Ash Wednesday or you even know what the ascension is, or, all that aside, details aside, um, life, death, and resurrection is the story that the sacred year tells year after year. And you can get down into the minutia of that, but I think some of the primary patterns are, of course, it begins with Advent. So Advent is the birth of Christ, the incarnation. It's God who became human. So we start with life, and then the story moves from there. And Advent is the preparatory season to Christmas, the birth of Christ.
And we're about to get into it. Yes.
Yeah, yes, yeah, here we go. And then Lent is another familiar preparatory season. It's 40 days preceding um, Good Friday and Holy Saturday and Easter Sunday, which of course is the narrative of death, but then resurrection. So, and then from Easter, a curious thing happens, and this actually interests me a lot, and I write about it in the book. From it, technically it's Pentecost Sunday. So if you think after the resurrection, Jesus is with his disciples, and the ascension happens, and then Pentecost happens. And Pentecost is the gift of the Holy Spirit for all people, proclaiming the word of God. So after Pentecost, it happens after Easter, so spring.
Mhm.
From spring all the way through summer until the first Sunday of Advent, which is like November.
Yeah.
um, it's the longest season in the liturgical calendar,
Mhm.
and it's known as ordinary time. And I actually really love that because nothing major happens in ordinary time. There's no major feast days, there's no huge ceremonies or rituals. And I think that's because ordinary time, that's where most of our life happens, right? It's just a
Mhm.
Monday, it's just a Tuesday, it's just life. And that is that is the time when we're invited to practice the resurrection in our actual ordinary everyday lives. So there's a lot of practice time woven into the year, and I really love that because I mean, life has its highs and lows, but not every day is going to be an Easter Sunday or a Christmas day.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. I do think I am appreciative of Canadians, even though this isn't exactly liturgical, but we do celebrate it. Is our Thanksgiving at least is in October, whereas your
Yeah,
Thanksgiving is right at the beginning of Advent,
right.
which I am sorry, Americans. I do not understand that. Like, move it back to October. It makes so much more sense.
A
There's
little
more
more
space.
spacing is so nice. I
Yes.
agree.
Um, but I know when I was mostly in evangelical churches, we did do Advent. Like we lit candles,
Mhm.
the four
Yeah.
weeks before Christmas. but I had never even known what Lent was or that people give up something for Lent until I got to
Sure.
university and was in a group with, people from all different churches. And a lot of them gave up stuff for Lent because I knew like, okay, we have Good Friday, we have Easter, but that's it. So
Right.
it was
Right.
interesting getting more into some of
Yeah.
these rhythms and practices and just helping you learn that, hey, we get to focus on different things at different parts of time, different
Yeah.
points in time, so that we can enter in to what God is doing in all different ways. So yeah, it is really interesting.
Yeah. And I think the practice is I think the invitation is take what you need and don't worry about the rest. None of
Hmm.
these are shoulds. If Lent
Yeah.
doesn't mean anything to you personally, don't worry about it. You know,
Yeah.
this is not a biblical concept in the sense that you'll never find a verse that says you need to practice Lent for 40 days before Easter. This is a tradition, and if it's meaningful to you, great. If it's not, don't
Mhm.
sweat it. And I think at its at its best, the liturgical year, it's an ongoing throughout the year opportunity to practice the story of God in your life. So to
Mm.
let the story of God meet you in your story. And that's also something that became really meaningful to me because as you know, Advent, my first pregnancy and my first loss during Advent felt that juxtaposition felt unforgivable at the time.
Mhm.
It felt like, how am I supposed to make sense of this? When the promise is, unto us a child is born. And I thought, well, for me, a child is gone, a
Mhm.
child is taken. So, and I had to, process and work through that. But what I came to realize is that, of course, my moment, my personal moment, and the seasonal moment were not meeting in direct ways at that time, but
Mhm.
the story always continues. And I could, if I kept reading, if I kept following the threads, I also found Mary, the mother of God, who was watching her son take his last breath.
Mhm.
And I felt seen by that in a way that I really needed. Um, and also Advent itself is people get, I'm not going to be a jerk about this technicality. Some people are jerks about it, but there is a distinction between Advent and Christmas. Christmas is the feast day, it's the celebration. Advent is actually not. Advent
Mhm.
is the season of preparation before Christmas. And
Mhm.
the season of preparation before the incarnation is a world crying out in pain. It's
Mhm.
not actually the twinkle lit Christmas tree and cozy, you know, we're not there yet. The baby hasn't been born yet. Hope has not come. It's a world crying out. And I
Mhm.
had to absorb that for myself before I was able to see that my loss during Advent, God was actually meeting me there too. Um, but it's a process. So if I could, I'm just going to read
Yeah,
one quick line which shares something that I really love about the liturgical year in the spirit of take what you need.
sure.
From the beginning in Advent through the end of its cycle in ordinary time, the liturgical year tells a story that mirrors the drama of the human experience. I'll skip ahead a little bit. The one thing this story will not do is skim the surface. This story does not skip tracks nor look away when the scene gets intense. Rather, the range of the liturgical story becomes for us one of its greatest gifts, expressing the radical empathy of God with us in every human moment. The I am incarnate in our joy, fear, sorrow, and surprise. God in every gradient of the color wheel that composes a life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's what you did in this book is you kind of mapped your story of coming to terms with loss and joy with the Advent calendar and with the liturgical
Mhm,
calendar.
mhm.
And I want to come back to Advent at the end since we're going into Advent now. So I want to spend most of our time there, but I want to jump ahead to just a few things, a few little snippets. And these aren't necessarily the most important part of the book, but I just they said something to me that I thought might resonate with some of our listeners. But you were talking about how before you lost your first baby, you hadn't really had want in the same way, but then after you lost the baby, you really had want.
Yes.
Um, and I think that is such a human thing, how we can be very surprised by love, right?
Mm,
Surprised by joy. We're not really, we don't understand what feelings are going to come.
yeah.
Um, and then when
Yes.
you were getting pregnant with your second, when you were pregnant, and just the fear,
Hmm.
yeah, that something was going to be wrong.
Yeah.
And I felt so sorry for you. You kept going into these doctor's appointments and they kept saying they can't find a heartbeat. I went through the same thing with Katie. It was
Oh,
awful.
it's so hard. Yeah.
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 And how do you stay peaceful? I don't think you
Yeah.
can stay peaceful in the midst of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Well, yeah. I mean, one thing that really helped me, I will say this, truly being pregnant again after a loss is one of the hardest things I've
Hmm.
ever walked through because you're waiting for 9 months. Every single day, you know that the worst could happen.
Yep.
And in both of my pregnancies that gave us our kids, there were scares along the way. And it it was truly just the terror that infused my everyday um, has shaped me for life. Uh, one of the things that helped me, because what else can you do? But one of the things that really helped me was instead of letting my mind reel into the future, where of course the worst was always happening in the future, instead of letting my mind fast forward, anything I could do to ground myself in the present really helped. And sometimes it was as simple as saying to myself, today I am pregnant. Today, this is what I have. Today, we're okay.
Hmm.
And I don't know what tomorrow's going to hold. I don't know. But I know that today, this is where I am. And that's enough. It has to be enough right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it shapes you. And something else that helped too is I think after our second loss, just the disbelief that it happened again. And I say that with great recognition that many women go through many losses and also many never have the children that they want. So there's no, I can only speak for myself, but um, something else that helped was in that space of disbelief. I can't believe this happened again. Was I had to make the choice that I was not going to learn the wrong lesson from the worst happening a second time. Because the wrong lesson would be it's better just not to try at all. It's
Mm.
better to just live small and and not try and not risk and not love. And I thought I had to decide this consciously, but I had to make the decision for myself wanting something that is life, something that is beautiful. I'm never going to regret that. And I'm not a fool for wanting something good
Hmm.
because I think it would be so easy to just say, "Oh, I was such a fool. It happened again." Um and I had to really ground myself in the choice that I was not a fool to want something good and I still want something good. Um and no love is ever wasted.
Yep.
But it's there's no shortcuts. There's no hacks.
Hmm. So true. So, I want to take you through. So you're pregnant with your second, and one of the big things that you realized as you were thinking about the liturgical calendar and just realizing how much we ourselves as women have a natural cycle too, that
Hmm.
kind of mimics, yeah,
Hmm.
life and death, and
Yeah.
that's what it all is. And how this is so true as women in our culture. Your period is something that is never supposed to be mentioned. It's supposed to be
Yep.
hidden. It's
Yep.
not, and I know this is awkward, but I want to read a paragraph, which I thought was awesome. You said, but I was just now discovering that the medical community had a radically different name for what I was calling a problem to manage. They called it the fifth vital sign, elevating menstrual health to the essential functions of body temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, and breathing rate. What I saw as a liability was actually an embodied icon of life itself. What I saw as an inconvenience was actually the wisdom of the body at work, a somatic intelligence that I had sidelined and silenced for far too long. Yeah. It's really hard to embrace your period, like to embrace
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
our
Right.
cycles. But that is true.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I still feel that way. I still feel very inconvenienced, and I still feel, um, you have to combat that, but reframing it as the fifth vital sign really, really did wonders for me when I first encountered that concept, because I see this is a sign that your body is doing everything it needs to do. And
Mhm.
that's good. That's as it should be. And also, what a testament to our inherent resilience that our body knows exactly how to biologically move through those inner seasons of life, death, and resurrection.
Mhm.
It's creation. It's the creation process at work in us, and that's
Mhm.
what we cycle through. And what an amazing thing. You're just going about your life and your body
Yeah.
is regenerating in this really unique kind of way.
Yeah.
um yeah, and the stigma never helps. That just, the
No.
shame and the hush hush, it just never helps.
Yeah.
I
And
remember.
leaking when you're in grade 7 or something. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, yeah. I yeah, I just, all the euphemisms for, ant flow, and it's so confusing as a
Yeah.
prepubescent, kid, adolescent, trying to figure this out. And I love hearing stories of people who say, I was taught that this is just kind of biological reality and there's no shame attached to it.
Mhm.
Because why would you be ashamed, frankly,
Mhm.
at this vital sign at work within you, working towards your wellness?
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so, just as an aside, as Stephanie noted in her book, you ignored signs when your period wasn't working properly when
Yeah.
you were younger.
Yeah.
You ignored
Yep.
that because we just didn't think of it as
Yep.
so. Yes, if you've got a lot of pain with your period, if your period's not regular, if there's just something that's weird, please go talk to a doctor because we often don't, and it is a good idea too. So, just as
Yeah.
an aside. Okay.
Yep.
And I love your conversation with God in the middle of this as you're realizing all this, as you're talking about, Holy Saturday and that in between when you're not sure what's going to happen and it's all very nerve-wracking and you're pregnant with your second child. And I love your convo with God. I'm so scared. I'm beloved. I'm a badass. That you said.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. This was one of my other grounding practices that, it really emerged impromptu, as I tell it in the book. But I just, I think at the time I was pregnant with, our daughter, and it was after our first loss, and there were so many scares. Um, and I was desperate to find some solid ground. I was desperate to steady myself somehow, and I had to find any way I could do that. So one of the ways that I could do that was, I really went through almost an internal interrogation and thought, okay, what do I actually know to be true if I shake this all out? Because I think there's a lot of sentiments out there, informed by maybe well-meaning, well-wishing, but I was not guaranteed a healthy pregnancy, a
Mhm.
healthy baby.
Mhm.
That was not a given.
Mhm.
Um, and if I couldn't count on that, what could I count on? And what it really sifted down to me for me was kind of this all right, what can I stand on? And it's, I know that I'm beloved by God.
Hmm.
I know that I'm beloved, and I know that I am baptized, which to me means I've been initiated into that pattern of Christ, life, death, and resurrection. That I belong with him in that. And I know that I'm a badass. And I say that, I really don't say that as a shock factor. It really came from that desperate place of, I have to find something to stand on here, or I'm just gonna get swept away. And I I chose that phrasing for myself because I thought, anybody who does this, anybody who has to hold one hand out to what they hope for and the other hand out to the terror of what might happen in that risk, you're that's badass behavior right there. That's courage. Even if you're terrified, that's
Hmm.
courage. And I think it takes radical courage to say, I'm going to take a chance on love. I'm going to take this risk. I'm going to hope for the best, even though I'm fearing the worst. And I think the way I say it in the book was, every day I hoped, and every day I feared my hope because I was so afraid that it would be dashed and disappointed and for nothing. And being in that space can feel really fragile. And I think that's, for me, why it became so important to reframe it as, you are not fragile right now. You were doing something incredibly hard and summoning up all sorts of reserves of strength you didn't even know you had to be here right now and keep moving forward.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was sort of, it became my morning shower ritual. um, I would cross myself in the shower, sort of like, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit,
Yeah.
um, and and remind myself, I'm beloved, I'm baptized, and I'm a badass.
Yeah. I love that.
And you can
And
feel free to swipe that. I'd be
yeah,
happy if you did.
and that applies not just for those of us who've experienced pregnancy loss or child loss, and we're desperately hoping that this pregnancy goes forward, but it's also, after a divorce of an abusive
Yeah.
husband, do you choose to love again or do you try
Yes.
again after? Yeah, like there's a lot of things in our lives where we're just in that holy Saturday, that in between where things are really bad, but something good might be coming. And how
That's
do you
right.
sit in that? How do you sit in
That's
that?
right. Yeah.
Um, so let's move forward again in the liturgical calendar back to Advent. And the second time you're going through Advent, this time you do have a baby. You start to feel labor pains like a week before Christmas. And when was your daughter born? December 20.
So she came a week early. So
Uh-huh.
her due date was actually 1 year to the day from our loss, which wigged me out the first time I saw that.
Right.
But then she was born early, so December 14th.
Yeah, that's nice. That's
Yeah.
nice. That's sort
Hmm.
of a gift. Yeah, I felt
Yeah.
that with Katie too. That was
Yeah.
a gift that yeah, wasn't born the same month.
Yeah.
So, I love what you said about how you discovered so many things about yourself because you had no pain tolerance.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And then you actually did. It's like, whoa. I think that's something that birth does. And I think that's
Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
Advent, I love the way so much of the liturgical calendar is actually based around women,
Mm,
like
it's so
Advent.
true. It's so
And
true.
yeah, like I think this is a special message, which
Yeah.
doesn't mean that men aren't included, but I love how God does include women's experiences
Yes.
and
Yes.
does frame things as cycles.
Yeah.
And that's what birth does to us is it's like, wow, you did something that you never thought you could do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. And I think I will carry the experiences of my births with me for life. I will always be the person who did that. And it doesn't matter how it's done.
Yeah.
But to really stand in that is, I remember after my daughter's birth, um you know, just after the recovery period,
Mhm.
I just felt like, wow, I was the most powerful person in the world.
Yeah.
Like I did that.
Yeah.
And I hope I never lose touch with that. And I think it's worth staying with.
hmm hmm I know some women really close to me who just had amazing birth stories, but then terrible recovery stories. It's like, but
Yeah.
don't lose the high
Yeah.
of what you
Yes.
actually did.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it is pretty amazing what we
Yep.
can do, what our bodies can do.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things you talk about near the end of your book is how empathetic witness is such a huge part
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
every stage in both pregnancy and birth and in the liturgical calendar is just being with one another, watching
Yeah.
and saying, I see your pain. I know a lot of people have friends, siblings, Bible study members who do go through miscarriages and who do go through baby loss. What would you tell them to do in the midst of that? Like, how do you help someone? How do you be that empathetic witness?
Empathy to me really just means a compassionate, being a compassionate presence to another person in their pain. And that doesn't feel like much when you want to be a source of comfort and support to someone, but actually it's everything.
Mhm.
And we all have these impulses, especially towards those we love. We have these impulses to fix and resolve and make better. And you can recognize that, but refrain.
Mhm. Mhm.
You can recognize that, but instead offer presence. And um, I think at a baseline, the biggest thing you can do is resist offering any kind of speculation as to why,
Yeah.
because there is no why.
Mhm.
Or if it is, I think that's above our pay grade. I
Mhm.
don't think that that's ours to know. So if you're not going to find why, and that's usually where the well-meaning harm, they meant well but they caused harm, comes in,
Mhm.
is when people try to forage for reasons why, and that is just not, that's not our domain. So if you can't do why, I think what you can offer is with. And that might mean, do you mean, do you want me to drive you to an appointment? Do you want a friend in the waiting room? Do you want, um can we bring you dinner?
Mhm.
Or not even asking, just dropping something off on their doorstep. And I think always asking, what would be a good friend to you right now? Do you want to talk on the phone? Do you want to get together and talk it out? Or do you not want to see me, but you would really love some brownies dropped off and we don't have to, no contact at all?
Yeah.
Um, so I think, asking what would support you right now. And another one is, I think this is key, especially for pregnancy loss and any other kind of hard dates, loss of a loved one or a divorce, is remembering dates, putting them in your calendar,
Mhm.
because they will remember year after year. And it can be pretty isolating to know that you're in that alone. But
Mhm.
I have dates of some of my friends' kind of grief anniversaries in my personal calendar, so that I can just say I'm thinking of you today,
Yep.
and that's it.
Yep.
Just being seen, being with, I think it really is everything.
Yep. I love that. Well, we are going into Advent again, and this year you are not pregnant, and you do have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So how has Advent changed for you this year?
Hmm. There's a lot more happy chaos. Now that our family is complete, I am leaning into the wonder of the season in a new way, and I'm free to do that. And that feels welcome. But
Mhm.
that's not everyone.
Mhm.
And again, I think there's angles to Advent that express, when your Advent and Christmas season is really hard, and also when it's really beautiful. There really is something for everyone to meet you there. But I think, with our ages right now, it especially is so sweet and fun to see their wonder come alive. My daughter is 3. She'll be 4 in December. So she'll be 4 very soon. And she is a Christmas baby through and through. Our neighbors know her as the kid who would be singing not just like jingle bells, but like the third verse of Hark the Herald Angels Sing, like walking down the sidewalk in July.
Right.
So I did not make her this way. This is just who she is, but she loves the Christmas story. And her
Mhm.
stuffed animals are often baby Jesus, and she is often Mary. And it's just so sweet to see the story come alive through play and to see it through her eyes. So I think I'm looking forward to that already.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, even after everything, tell us where we can get it.
Anywhere books are sold. It
Yeah.
is out now. And I would say, my, if anything in this conversation spoke to you, I hope that you'll consider joining me in the book for a deeper conversation. I
Yeah.
I am, of course, as an editor, my job is elevator pitches, and I've realized that I'm through this, jumping the dust to the author side. I'm pretty terrible at sound bites, and I've always been terrible at small talk. So you won't get that in the book, but you will get a deep reading experience.
hmm
And if you found anything here, I hope you'll find more there.
Yeah, no, it is really lovely. And for those of you who are getting into the liturgical calendar, it's a great way to invite, yeah, just God's rhythms into the way that we see our own lives. And what does it mean to wait, to mourn, to celebrate, or even just to live in ordinary times. So I love
Yeah,
that. And
yeah,
if you have questions about liturgical calendar and this all seems really weird, this is a great introduction to it, and I think it will really excite you because it does change the way we see the rhythms of life and the rhythms of the year. And God created the world with cycles, right?
right,
We
right.
have winter, spring, summer, fall.
Yeah,
We have our own bodies. We have night and day. Like it's all rhythms. And so as we can
yes.
remember, yeah, life, death, and resurrection, it is lovely and incorporate that into our lives. So check out even after everything, and I will put the link in the podcast notes. And Stephanie also has a Substack. What's it called?
It's called Slant Letter, and it's for writers about the writing craft.
Yes, and believe me, that will be awesome because Stephanie is an awesome editor, and I've really appreciated working with her in the past. So the links to that are in the podcast notes too. And thank you, and happy Advent, everybody, as we get into it. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.
So appreciated Stephanie's humility and candor and honesty in sharing her struggles with us. And now I want to bring an inspirational story of what someone is doing to be the hands and feet of Jesus in their community. Well, I am thrilled to have on the podcast today Leah Sanderson, who is the development director at the Wellhouse. Hi, Leah.
Hey, yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and thank you for reaching out. So I have so many readers and listeners reach out with really cool things they're doing that make me really excited to see how, the body of Christ is doing all kinds of different things, using our different giftings and serving where we're really needed. And um, why don't you tell us about the Well House, Leah?
So, the Wellhouse is located in a very small town in Alabama, and it's really one of the most special places you'll ever step foot at. It's a residential program for women and children who are being trafficked. And who have now escaped their trafficking situation and are experiencing healing on our campus. And our campus is special because it's the largest of its kind in the country. Basically, what we mean by that is we're serving women and children ages 11 all the way up to 55, 60. And we're able to serve a whole variety of things that serve the whole person. So, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and mentally, all on our one campus, which is pretty rare for a residential program.
Right. Now, I think that there's this misnomer that trafficking is something which happens in other places.
Sure.
And that's why I really wanted to talk to you today, is to help educate our listeners on what trafficking looks like in the North American context. So when you say trafficking, what do you mean?
Yeah, a lot of people think trafficking means the traveling of a person from maybe state to state, country to country. But actually, all trafficking means, and definitionally, especially in a court of law, it means force, fraud, or coercion of a person for the buying, and for our purposes, for the buying and selling of sex for their body. Now,
Right.
there's labor trafficking as well, but the Wellhouse is particularly interested in sex trafficking and how that affects women in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's happening, the kind of the saying that gets thrown around a lot is it's happening in our backyard, and it's cliche, but it's true. I mean, you have states like Alabama who have things like super trafficking highway of the South, as in I-65, I-20. And then you also have the everyday kind of culture we live in, which I love what your podcast talks about, that is pornographic in nature, and is willing to purchase sex from people. And so we also live in that kind of culture. And so it's inevitable that this kind of thing would be happening, especially in America.
Right. So some of the pushback that I often hear when I talk about sex trafficking is, well, a lot of the women choose it,
Uh,
right? Like sex workers choose it, the consensual porn industry exists, and so they're all choosing it. And
yeah.
so how can you say that they're being trafficked?
Yeah, it's interesting because what we find is that our residents, they're unaware of the word sex trafficking, human trafficking. This is
Mhm.
something that's been happening to them all their life. This is normal for them. It's what mom
Mhm.
did. It's generational, and so we kind of have a saying that sometimes they're the last people to know what has even happened to them. But when they get
Yeah.
language for it, it can feel really empowering, even to say like, "Oh, what happened to me wasn't my fault." And the way I think about it is a stat we have is that women who enter prostitution usually have a life expectancy of 6 to 7 years. And if that's
Wow.
the case, then it's not a safe job for women. Accountants don't die in 6 to 7 years.
Yeah.
And so this kind of job, if it is the choice, it's dangerous, it's violent, it's
Hmm.
not honoring to their bodies, their minds, their souls. And what we're finding is it's rarely the choice. The other thing we say is if you can't say yes, you can't say no, right? And so if the
Hmm.
only choice for this woman has been prostitution, then she didn't really choose it, did she? It was just the thing she had to do to survive. So it's really not a choice at
Yeah.
all. I don't know any little girls that grow up saying, I really hope one day I'll be a prostitute.
Yeah.
And I think we'd all, at the core of us, we know that to be true. It can just be hard to see a woman who, potentially has made some poor choices. And so we don't discount any of that. Our residents take responsibility for the things that
Hmm.
they've done, but we also set a culture that's very clear about there are some things that absolutely had nothing to do with you, that you didn't have the choice.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of always balancing, how do we take responsibility, and also realize this isn't my fault. Not all of this
Yeah.
is my fault.
Exactly. And you think too, most people, most women who end up in prostitution or in porn work or whatever, they have a history of sexual abuse,
Right.
like a
Yes.
massive history of sexual abuse. And
Yep.
so, how much of that is a free choice, or how much of
Yep.
it is a whole lot of trauma reactions
Yep.
and just what their normal is? Yeah.
Yeah, we want to be able to give them the agency to make a new choice.
Mm-hmm.
What we found, 85% of our residents were sexually abused by the age of 6. Um,
Yeah.
and so when you have that as the baseline for how I think
Hmm.
about how I exist in the world, choice becomes really complicated.
Yeah, yeah. So what role does the church play in this? Like is it are women being trafficked in Christian circles?
There's I'm sure you've heard of things like satanic ritual abuse,
Hmm.
and that kind of was something that became extremely more well known in the past few years. And we're still doing a lot of research to figure out, like, okay, let's hear these women's stories. What happened to them? How did it happen?
Hmm.
Um, as far as the purchasing of sex goes, yes. I mean,
Hmm.
there are men in the churches that we all attend who are purchasing sex. And not to discount women either. Women are also prescribed to this and support the industry of buying and sell and the buying and purchasing of somebody's body too.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, the church is a large contributor to it. It's also what we've seen a large contributor to ending it. We have a lot of
Mhm.
incredible churches that support the Wellhouse, men who are committed to not only their own personal purity, but the fact that, okay, if what I'm watching is potentially the trafficking of another woman's body, then I want nothing to do with that. And
Yeah.
we've seen that be a really empowering tool for men to kind of like take the cause up for themselves,
Yes.
and spread it in their lives to the men in their lives. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that is really powerful because so often we talk about porn in terms of sin, and I'm not saying that that's the wrong language, but it's an incomplete language
yeah,
because we also need to realize this is a justice issue.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, real people are being hurt
yeah,
by the porn industry, and so is that really where you want to what you want to support?
yeah.
Yeah, so that is really good. So, tell me, can you give me an example or a story of someone who's been through your program? I know you can't. I'm not asking you to violate confidentiality, but just in general terms.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the stories that, for me, one, because it's a big God story and because this person is precious, is there was a woman who was trafficked just in our county, which is crazy. Um, Grew up really close to the well house, and I mean, it's like it it is pretty crazy that this is happening here. You know, this isn't
Mhm.
happening. In Mexico or across the border or in China to little girls where that is happening, but it's also happening
Mhm.
here. So and she did wonderfully through our program, and I just think it's an empowering story because she knew about the well house for a long time and didn't come
Mhm.
get help because it's a difficult decision to make. And so when she did get help, I mean, she's since just been an incredibly creative person working in Shopwell is our resident run social enterprise where they make jewelry and home goods, candles, quilts, and they're
Mhm.
employed while they're here on our campus. And she really thrived and she's been incredibly healthy since. And that's a great success story. But it's also one that points to a larger issue of, okay, so who are the people who are contributing to this industry? She never had to leave her hometown to be trafficked.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so we know that the contributors live in our county, in the county we're serving right here. And so she has a really special God story that's actually shared on our website, where she had a vision of herself walking in a field one day when she was in the depths of addiction, being trafficked, felt very worthless. And about 2 years later, comes to the Well House and she is walking to therapy and realizes she's walking in that field. So
Wow.
she had just this overwhelming, like, oh, God knew all along that this is where I was going to be. And man, if she could be on the podcast, she could tell you a million other stories about these like really specific ways God was so clear that it was the well house for her.
Um,
And so, you know, without being able to tell too much of her story, it points to the fact that the women who come to the well house are the lucky ones. There's a large portion of
yeah.
women that are out there who don't get the services that they need.
Yeah.
And so she points to the kind of resilience it takes to make a hard decision to pick up your life for 2 years and come to a program. And
Mhm.
you don't get to see your kids a ton. And I mean, just the bravery that really takes. The well house isn't rescuing them. They're making incredibly brave choices to come and be with us and start their healing with us.
Yeah, I love that so much. I know when you reached out to me, one of the things that you said was that a lot of the messages in so many of our Christian books actually do contribute to the underpinning of sex trafficking, even if obviously that's not the intention. And I'm not trying to say that any of these authors wanted to do that. But when you paint men as insatiable and as primarily oriented towards getting sex and that they don't care about the emotional connection, like how does that fuel sex trafficking?
It's such a good question, because, you know, what we know is true is that many men are fighting pornography addictions that they didn't ask for. Um,
Mhm.
these things that they're also victims to. Um, and more than that, we've seen that one paints men as the only part of the problem, which we know isn't true. I mean, women tell us all the time, it was a female that trafficked me. And so we get a
Right.
bad picture of what this looks like if we're always looking for a certain type of male. So
Yes.
there's that aspect. And there's also the cultural aspect that kind of what I said earlier, like we don't empower men to take up this cause on their own, and fight for what is true and right and just and kind and loving, if they don't have the capability to. And it's just not been what we've experienced. There's incredible men. I mean, men who have stood on our board for years and years and years, who are walking in integrity and honesty and
Mhm.
vulnerability. And so it should, yeah, like you said earlier, it's not the full picture if that's what's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. And I just want to reiterate what you just said. Like, there are amazing men on your board.
Yes.
And that's the thing. People, not all men are lust monsters. Like, this is not who all men are. This is not who Jesus made us to be.
Mm,
And I think when both men and women can see the damage that is being done to
yes.
real victims of sex trafficking, then we can also be part of the problem. And
Mhm,
I see a real movement of Jesus in this area in North
mhm.
America, like calling, because I do see increasingly, and maybe you see this too, that porn is not only being talked about in terms of sin anymore, but that we
Mm,
are more and more concerned about the justice issue, which makes me happy.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and so I think there is a role for all of us to play. So how
Mm.
can people support you if people want to support what the Well House is doing?
Yeah, I mean, I know you've got listeners from all over the country. So if you're located here in Alabama, we'd love to have you come volunteer. That's a big way to support. And then, pray for us. We have a children's program of girls 11 to 18 and a women's program. And we specifically need prayer for our children's program. Those girls have just been through things that are unimaginable at an age that they should have never had to go through them. And so they present with particular issues that can be difficult day to day for staff and for them. So praying for that program especially, and yeah, praying that the Lord would also reveal Jesus to our residents. We because we want everything to be a choice, we present them with the option of Jesus, but only He does the work. So praying that He would continue to do it. And yeah, you can financially partner with us. We have our website you can go to. If you Google just the Wellhouse, it'll pop right up. You can donate to us. Be a restoration partner is one of the best ways you can partner with us, which is giving monthly out of your monthly budget to keep supporting. And that's more of a sustainable way that our operations can keep going. So I always like to plug that option.
Yes.
But being a part of what we're doing, and maybe you don't have the financial means to do so, but you can pray and you can talk about what we're doing, like what we're doing on this podcast, Sheila. It's so important to keep talking about what is really the landscape of trafficking. What does it really look like, and what can people do about it?
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much, Leah.
Thank
And thank you for answering the call of
Yeah.
Jesus to
Mm,
rescue those who need rescuing and to be there, to be his hands and feet. I think that's beautiful. That's what the church should be doing. It's such a lovely picture of that. So thank you.
yeah, of course. An honor to be with you.
I hope that this podcast helped you see Jesus in a new way this Christmas season, that we can be his hands and feet, and that we don't need to put on a happy face about it. We don't need to always pretend that everything is fine when it's not. Christmas reminds us that things can be messy, because that's just what life is. But Jesus shows up in the midst of that mess. And when we are able to see him in the mess, amazing transformations can happen. Next week is the last episode of the Bear Marriage Podcast for 2024, and it's going to be a fun celebratory one. We are going to talk about our peer-reviewed paper that is out in the Journal of Sociology of Religion. It's got all kinds of new stats that weren't even in the Great Sex Rescue that we're going to share with you. We're going to share with you the process of what it took to get published, and we get to kind of celebrate because people told us that it couldn't be done. People said, oh, you can't get peer-reviewed. And a lot of authors use that as their excuse for not getting peer-reviewed. They say, oh, it's impossible to do when you're doing research in the Christian realm. Well, guess what? It's not, because we did it, and let's raise the bar. And so join us for our big celebration next week on the Bear Marriage Podcast, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.